face both of you. Yeah, you can just talk from here.
Before you get started.
Oh, hi.
Hello, my friend.
CEO of Bennett.
Oh, thank you. I'm so glad that we get to continue. Excellent.
Absolutely.
Okay, wonderful. Kate, thank you so much. Good
This
to
is
see you
awesome.
again.
Yeah, thank you.
Wonderful.
Okay, good morning, everybody. We're going to get started. So good morning, and thank you all for joining our panel discussion on housing as a platform for economic mobility. My name is James Anderson. I'm a director on the Sustainable Communities team at Fannie Mae. I want to start with a big thank you to Empath for hosting this fantastic conference. What an amazing opportunity for all of us to talk with one another, glean ideas from each other, share the work that we do, learn about the work that other people are doing, and maybe make that new partnership or that new collaboration, which really is so important, right? Because the work that we all do is really hard work. The problems that we attempt to solve are multifaceted. They're based on issues that are deeply entrenched, and often a one-dimensional solution isn't effective. So we need to layer our strategies. We need cross-sector approaches to handle these problems, and a forum like this gives us the opportunity to explore those options together. So thank you so much to Empath for hosting this. I'm excited to be joined today by my fellow panelists, Kate Bennett. She is the administrator at the Boston Housing Authority. She brings over 25 years experience in housing development, policy, and planning, and she spearheaded several strategic initiatives, including the Choice Neighborhoods revitalization at the Whittier Street Public Housing Development in Roxbury, and Emilio Dorcely. He's the CEO of Urban Edge. Emilio brings 20 years experience in nonprofit, philanthropic, civic organization, and business development practices. And Urban Edge has been serving the Boston area for over 4 decades to help create and preserve affordable housing and support the development of vibrant and culturally diverse communities. So we're going to start off with Kate and Emilio and I each talking a little bit about our work and our interest in the space of housing as a platform for economic mobility. And then I'll moderate a few questions for the panel, and then there's going to be open Q&A with the audience. So Kate is going first. Please welcome Kate.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, great. So, first of all, good morning. It's great to be here. It's great to be here with these guys, and also with Mayor CEO Janey, who I had the pleasure to work with at City Hall, and I'm so happy that she has landed with Empath. I think that's just a great outcome all around. And so this is one of my favorite topics, honestly, which is, how can we as housers provide economic opportunity and for our residents? And so we think about this a lot within the Housing Authority. The Housing Authority, for those that may not know, in Boston, owns and manages about 10,000 units of public housing throughout the city, and we also administer another 16,000 or so housing vouchers, which folks take into the private market as an affordable housing subsidy. And so taken together, we're administering housing for about 9% of Boston's population. And it's a very low-income population. The average income per household is about $15,000 per unit. About 40% of our families don't speak English in the home, and so language access is a huge part of everything that we do. And although housing is, the foundation of what we do, we're also working across many sectors because our families have, a lot of complex needs. We're working in not only economic opportunity, but youth services, elder services, violence prevention, many job training and other, sort of training types of programs. And so most of the folks that come to us are formerly homeless or have been at serious risk of homelessness. And so, housing has always been critically important for them as a platform for upward economic mobility. And I think housers have kind of intuitively known this for a long time, but now there's this, of course, whole body of research out there that has kind of affirmed the housing first model, and we certainly see this day in and day out at BHA. Our mission is really to house the most vulnerable families in our city, but in order to use housing as a platform for opportunity, there is so much more that is required, and people are just really dealing with a lot in their lives. And I think what is critically important to leverage housing stability into economic mobility is really meeting families where they're at. And that is why we partner with Empath and Compass and other partners that I think really get that and develop models and strategies that are really addressing families that have incredibly little means and incredibly challenging realities. And so I first just want to commend those partners that kind of get it in that way. And, the stresses, the traumas, the challenges, whether they be physical or mental health challenges, and other things that are barriers for people in sort of getting traction with some of these programs, really need to be part of the approach. And we have had some false starts with approaches that are only successful for sort of a thin band of very functional, high-functioning families or individuals. And that's not ultimately helpful for us. And so again, I really appreciate the approaches from those in the room that are comprehensive and holistic in that way. So I'll just mention briefly 3 initiatives at BHA that we've undertaken in the name of economic mobility, and we can certainly come back to them in the Q&A if they're of interest. First, we've really dramatically expanded our FSS program, our Family Self-Sufficiency Program. It was, I think, at 175 families back in 2019. It's now about to hit 1,500 families. It's one of the largest programs in the nation, and we've gotten, among those families, we have over $2 million in escrowed savings. And that is, thank you, that is really significant in terms of very concrete outcomes for these families, whether it's their ability to buy a car or move to somewhere else that they want to be, and in some cases even buy a home, get better paying jobs. We have just a really good set of outcomes from that program, and we're really just trying to increase those numbers as quickly and as much as we can. Secondly, we have what is known as our ECHO program, which is our, I always have to look at this, Expanding Choice in Housing Opportunity Program. And this is for voucher holders. We have a concentration of our voucher holders that want to live in Roxbury and Dorchester and certain neighborhoods of the city, but we also have voucher holders that really want to move to other neighborhoods, and they face a lot of challenges doing that. And they either want to move because they want to be with family, or they want to go to different schools, or they want to access different, services, but they have a hard time using their vouchers in a lot of neighborhoods of our high-cost city, as well as outside of Boston. And our voucher holders are eligible to take those vouchers wherever they want. And so for those families that want that choice, we've developed a program that includes counseling. We've built a very comprehensive search tool to help them explore neighborhoods that they may want to go to. We've done a lot of landlord outreach and development in historically, underserved neighborhoods with respect to voucher utilization. And most importantly, we've changed our subsidy structure with vouchers. We were the first housing authority in the nation to utilize what's called small area fair market rents, which allows us to adjust our voucher payments by neighborhood. And so it means that somebody that formerly couldn't access Charlestown or Beacon Hill or West Roxbury or Newton can now compete with a voucher in those neighborhoods. And so that has been a really important tool and program for us. And third, in partnership with Empath, and this is one of our largest efforts, and Empath we have a long history with many initiatives, including at the Whittier Choice Neighborhoods site, where we provided mobility mentoring to the 200 families that were in the process of redevelopment there with Empath. We've launched what we call the AMP Up program, and it's an initiative to help families sort of rise out of poverty but remain in their communities. That's where they want to be. And it's a really remarkable partnership with Empath, JPEL at MIT, Larry Katz at Harvard, to evaluate the impacts of their economic mobility tool and bridge. And I'm just really excited about that. We're still in the recruitment stage. We've got more than a couple hundred families enrolled, and I hope to be back, at a future conference, talking about the results of that work, but we're very excited about it. And so, the Housing Authority is just really committed to this work. We're interested in introducing best practices to our residents and working in, kind of very community-based and resident. We partner with our residents on these initiatives. We have advisory boards and resident leaders that are very much in the conversation when we roll out these programs. They are very clear with us about what's going to work and what's not going to work. And we listen. I think part of the reason we've had success is that, our staff has really listened to that resident voice. And so we welcome additional partnerships in this space, and I'll trail off there for others to talk more. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Kate. And now let's welcome Emilio.
Well, thank you. Can everyone hear me? Great. So my name is Emilio Dorcely, CEO at Urban Edge. But before I start, I want to just say thank you to Kate, because in addition to all of the partnerships she's already mentioned, Urban Edge, along with our partners, and I see Taronda from JP&DC, and the community builders as part of a development team that is working in partnership with BHA to redevelop a portion of Mildred Haley, which is a significant project, and we hope is going to add not only high quality affordable housing, but also the types of services and support that families are in need of. So Kate and her team are partnering all over the city and beyond. But I also want to thank the Impact team and Kim Janey. We not only had the opportunity to partner with her as mayor, but also equally important as our city council person, where our office is located in a significant number of our affordable housing, and we've really enjoyed that and look forward to working with Impact in the future. I don't know about all of you, but when we first at Urban Edge started talking about Impact and it was actually with some of my colleagues, and really thinking about the experience that some of us have had, not only professionally, but also from our lived experience, about the challenges and the work that individuals who are living in affordable housing, whether it be BHA or some other income-restricted housing, and the challenges that that either we have felt individually or have had colleagues, friends, or clients that we've worked with over the years. And what we began to realize was that this was not simply, housing is the core. Having safe access to affordable housing is the beginning. It allows people to begin to start thinking about other parts of their life. But the same challenges and how complicated and difficult it is to develop and provide affordable housing, it is just as difficult and complicated for people to begin to access some of these other opportunities that I think that we've talked about. And so in thinking about that, when Urban Edge started to plan and develop our strategic plan, we really made a concerted effort to say, and I think Kate said it best, how do we meet people where they are? For a very long time, Urban Edge has had a long reputation in building affordable housing. We have a current portfolio of close to 1,500 units and have an active pipeline of over 400 units that we're developing over the next couple years. But we've also done a lot of resident services and community engagement around leadership development in the broader community, and have spent years working to help people become first-time homebuyers. We ordinarily have probably on any given year over 600 people, or actually, let me say this, 600 households who participate in our first-time home buying program. As you can imagine, there are not 600 opportunities for affordable home ownership. So we ordinarily have a significant number of people that we help prepare, we get their credit in line, we help them build their savings, and yet they cannot become a first-time home buyer because the supply and the opportunity and the cost in a high-cost market like the greater Boston area and beyond is just beyond their ability. So in thinking about those things, what we decided to do was to be able to double down. And what that meant for us is to take a look at where we had strengths and ability, and then figure out what could we add in order to really help people go to the next step. And one of the reasons that we were attracted to Impact was the idea of that it's not organizations or the staff of organizations that decide what goals individuals should have. It's actually the work of organizations and staff to work with residents and clients to help them navigate and understand what it is they want to achieve and what will it take for them to achieve it, and then connecting them to those resources and supporting them even when they fall. Because at the end of the day, in order for any of these economic mobility opportunities, programs to work, people have to feel the ownership that this is for them, this is for their families, and they're going to achieve this. Although they might need support and some assistance, but it is them doing the work. And so from there, once we really all agreed on that, we said what we really need to do is to look at economic mobility or wealth building as a continuum. That on one end, you may have home ownership, which for many people, with some work, and what we found that we ordinarily sometimes work with people for 18 months or more. Because maybe in the first year, what we're doing is helping them just develop savings or building their credit. And it takes a significant amount of time to get them past the point where they can actually get approved for a mortgage. But for some people, there are even more basic elements that they need to do. So when we looked at all of these things, we came up with a range of offerings. One that took a look at things like match savings, where we found that there was a significant number of people who just didn't even have savings. And so what we decided to do is we worked with Midas and we implemented a match savings program where individuals, whether they choose $20 a month or up to $100 a month, will get a 2-to-1 match. And then in thinking about even something that simple, to say, wait a minute, what happens when an individual has met with their coach, they're doing well for 3, 4, whatever number of months, and then something happens? Is it that all of that hard work and commitment that they've put in is supposed to go to waste? So what we did is that we said, you know what, we need to have a source of funding. So we created an emergency fund so that at least on one occasion, if you've been doing your part and you've done all the things that you're supposed to do and some unexpected, maybe it's your car that breaks down and that's what you need to get to work, that we would be able to support them, allow them to take a break, provide them with some funding, and then allow them to come back and resume the savings. Because what we found is that people who are living in poverty are dealing with so many different things that sometimes it's not because people don't want to succeed. They just have so many obstacles, and our work is to try to remove as many of those obstacles as we can to allow people to be successful. And then we thought about things like, what happens when someone, in addition to savings, where what they really need is to begin to think about their educational aspirations or thinking about what kind of job training. And so we created a partnership with JVS, which is one of the leading workforce development organizations here in the greater Boston area. And the idea was to really understand where people are and saying different people may need different things. And then we are not an organization that can provide all of it, but what we can do is use our over 40 years of experience to say, what have we learned during that period? And where do people usually get stuck? And what are the kind of services that we need to make sure we have a direct line and access to? So it's not just a soft referral, but it's us taking them by hand saying, okay, you now have this other partner who is ready, able, and has been waiting for you, and is going to dedicate the time to help you figure out how you get to whatever goals you have in that particular area. And when I say this, I use this as an example because sometimes when people think about economic mobility, we think it's all about, well, how do we increase their income? But it's really more about how do we give people an opportunity to actually believe and have hope and to know that the dreams and the aspirations that they may have might be possible. It may not be easy and it may not be immediate, but there is an opportunity to build a pathway that can help them do that. And so the hope is that, for example, we were fortunate enough where we got a grant from the city of Boston to help people build their credit, where if we work with an individual and they're able to increase their credit past a certain number of points, that they can be eligible for a $5,000 grant. And this was meant as an incentive to be able to help people become homeowners, because as you know, in the tightening market, you need a minimum credit score just to even have the opportunity of being approved for a mortgage. And so when we put those things together and then we develop partnerships with folks like MAHA and their first generation down payment assistance program, and then created down payment assistance for our own residents, an idea that we took from one of our partners, Madison Park, and really began to say, you know what? It's not the pieces themselves. It's how you create a continuum so that if someone is successful at part A and B, that they can look down the line and say, wait a minute, if I want to do more, I have another series of opportunities that I can work with my coach on that can lead me up the ladder of economic mobility. And for us, that's what it's about. It's really making sure that we try to develop the resources and the relationships. And this is the other area that I think is really important to point out. You can have all the right programs, all the right resources, but if you don't have staff who have the ability and the willingness to really take the time to work directly with individuals despite their challenges, despite the ups and downs that their life ordinarily has, the level of success is not going to be what it can be. And that's why I always give a shout out to our staff, because at the end of the day, I'm always the one saying, hey, we gotta have systems, we gotta do this, we gotta make sure we have evaluation, and they're always pushing back. And I like that pushback because what it does, it forces us to have to really remind ourselves, what is it that we're doing? Why are we doing it? Who are we doing it for? And how do we find the right balance between making sure we have guidelines that are fair and clear and transparent, but we're going all out for our residents and for our community members in trying to make sure whatever opportunities and resources are available to them, that we can make sure they can gain access to it. And when we first launched this about 5 months ago, we weren't sure how this was going to work because, again, we were going from primarily focusing on things like student loan counseling, first-time home buyer, to this new continuum. And when we did the soft launch, we now have about 60 participants, and we're hoping to, by this time next year, to have well over 300 who are going through this continuum. And then we're even open to tweaking things because just the other day, we had a conversation trying to understand, although we have the funding for down payment assistance, with the rising interest rates, do we need to step back and have a better understanding of, for each dollar, where is it better spent in this current financial environment? Is it in helping someone buy interest rates down, or is it increasing their down payment assistance? And so part of what I guess I use that as an example is that no matter how well you plan, develop, and create your programming, the environment, both political and social, that's happening, you have to be willing to come back, take a look at it, and see what's changed, and then at least attempt to understand how that impacts what your outcomes are going to be and whether or not you can adapt to the changing environment. So with that, I want to just say thank to all of you, and I look forward to just answering questions and using some more examples of the work and hopefully share some other successes. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Emilio. And so for those who aren't familiar with Fannie Mae, we're the largest financer of housing in the United States. We finance 1 out of every 4 homes. And the work that I do on the Sustainable Communities team involves testing innovative and cross-sector strategies that address affordable housing challenges, but consider the ecosystem of the community. And one of those is opportunity for economic mobility and also access to health and wellness and education. So given that, it's probably no surprise that I absolutely feel and concur that housing is the foundation for a quality life. Housing is the foundation for economic opportunity. And I'll talk about, there's a lot of different initiatives that Fannie Mae has to give people equitable access to affordable and sustainable home ownership. One that I'd like to talk about is our Healthy Housing Rewards program. And there's a version of it called Enhanced Resident Services. So in this program, multifamily properties can finance at special terms if they set aside some units for lower income individuals and families, and also provide those residents with services such as health and wellness, food access, youth engagement, and also work in financial capability support. The program also requires that that property has a resident services coordinator. That resident service coordinator kind of acts like a case manager for those residents, right? Coordinating the services for them, making sure that they're taking advantage of what's available to them. And so along those lines, I've looked at an Urban Institute report that shows that in one property with coordinated services, residents were able to increase their income by 16%. So a very clear example of housing as the platform, layer on the services, and build the economic mobility of those residents. Another study by Stewards of Affordable Housing for the Future showed that over a 2-year period, families that lived in properties with coordinated services increased their income by, on average, $6,400 a month. They compared that to families over the same 2-year period that were not living in properties with coordinated services. That average increase in income was $468 a month. So that's much more than a 10-fold difference increase in the earnings of those residents because, again, using housing as a platform, layering on services, and increasing the opportunity and the economic mobility of those residents. So here's another powerful statistic I want to share with you. For every $1 that's invested in eviction prevention, $4 in social benefit is returned. So for every $1 that's invested to keep people in their homes, you have a 4 times return on that investment in terms of social benefit. And of course, a stronger local economy is better for everybody who's there. So an example, a few years ago through the Fannie Mae Innovation Challenge, we awarded a contract to an organization called Human Resource Development Council of District 9 in Bozeman, Montana. So I'm going to call them HRDC. HRDC came to us with a very compelling proposal to build permanent, supportive housing for those experiencing homelessness in Bozeman, Montana, via a tiny home village. And they summed up their proposal something like this. They said, homelessness is very expensive in Bozeman, Montana. It stresses our social services. It puts strain on the local cafe that's free or reduced cost. It strains the food pantry. It puts strain on the warming shelter resources. It also strains the local detention center and the hospital, especially the emergency room. So the homeless issue is expensive. Why do we keep paying for bad outcomes? We keep incurring these expenses, and yet we are not changing the trajectory of these individuals. They remain homeless. So why not address it at the root cause? They need a home. So we had a 2-year contract with HRDC. During that 2-year time period, they built the tiny home village. In November 2021, 12 tiny homes were built, residents moved in, and HRDC partnered with the local hospital to do a study to say, for these residents, what does it look like 6 months before move-in, and what does it look like 6 months after move-in? It's pretty astounding results. An 85% reduction in costs to the hospital. That's $400,000 in cost savings to the hospital. 12 tiny homes, 6 months. So an example of how we talk about economic mobility for the residents, for the people who live in the units. Stable housing is also a tool for the economic prosperity of the community as well. So speaking about the challenge, we've completed 3 phases of the challenge. We've awarded over $7 million to organizations just like HRDC, and we have a challenge running right now. So we're in the conclusion phase of it. In January, we're going to announce $5 million in contract awards. And for this phase of the challenge, we asked our applicants to present solutions that address the needs of Black consumers specific to the lack of affordable housing supply, to insufficient funds for a deposit or a down payment on housing, and low or invisible credit. And we focused on the unmet needs of Black renters and Black homeowners because we feel that this is a way to promote innovations that could meaningfully address the inequities in the housing system caused by past racist practices and discriminatory practices. And I'm very excited that in January we'll have partnerships with 5 new organizations that have innovative ideas on how to tackle those issues. So I'm very much an advocate for what some of you may know as a housing first policy. You must first stabilize housing to really give people the opportunity to thrive and live a quality life. And here's one last parting thought that I'd like to share. All aspects of a person's life are dictated by the time horizon of their housing. Meaning that if somebody has unstable or uncertain housing, they really cannot see their life, they cannot plan for their life beyond the date where they no longer have a place to live. It makes long-term planning nearly impossible. Somebody who's in an unstable or uncertain housing situation is probably not making a 3-year career progression plan. They're probably not spending their time and their money to gain accreditations to increase their earning potential or maybe get a higher paying job. Everything in their life is dictated by the time horizon of their housing. So the psychological impact of unstable housing is an extremely strong deterrent against economic mobility. Conversely, secure, stable housing is not only a platform for economic mobility, but it gives those residents, those individuals, and those families a sense of agency. It actually gives them the opportunity to think optimistically about their future. Those are my comments. Thank you. So we're going to move into some moderated questions here. Kate, the first question is going to be for you.
Okay.
What are some barriers you see to public housing residents using their housing as a platform to reach other goals?
Well, I think there's a broad array of challenges, many that have been mentioned, that folks face. But to me, what has really risen to the top of that list in recent years is mental health challenges. I think that whether it's with parents or with kids or someone in the family, a senior, I see a lot of struggle in that area and a lot of inability to get those mental health challenges adequately addressed. And so I know that our city's working hard to, kind of try to create the right supports. I think our hospital community, which is very strong in Boston, is trying hard to kind of create those supports. But I don't see those efforts really reaching families yet. I mean, on a daily basis, we are confronted with families that are at risk of losing housing, much less, advancing their economic goals, but actually, going backwards and at threat of losing housing because of mental health challenges. And it's not to say, I mean, there are physical health challenges, there are certainly many other factors that play into, as Emilio described, like just the situations that families find themselves in, even when they're doing everything right, and I think the point you made, Emilio, about this isn't a linear process, right? This is a process full of stops and starts, and the models and approaches have to address that. But for me, mental health supports, whether it's, really serious mental health issues or even just, the realities of stress in people's lives. I mean, there's a range of supports that are needed there. Would float to the top.
Great. Okay, thank you. Emilio, second question is for you. So how do you plan to reach residents who can most benefit from economic mobility programming?
Sure. One of the most difficult things, I think, is doing the outreach. When I talked about the number of units that we have in our portfolio, close to 1,500, just to give you a sense of who lives there, I would say well over 90% of our residents self-identify as people of color. And the average income is well below the 35,000 range, which is similar to when you look at our core neighborhood in Jackson Square. And most of the individuals who live in our housing, I would say a vast majority, are women with children, or fall into the category of the next largest, which are elders. A significant number of our residents are folks who have lived in the neighborhood over multiple generations. And some of them, depending on the age of the housing, may have even grew up in that building or in that unit. I paint that picture just to kind of make sure folks get a sense, because when we try to reach out with our residents, and what I mentioned earlier about the importance of the relationship of staff, and I think James also pointed to it, whether you call them resident coordinators, community engagement officers, that is a really key aspect, because you have individuals who, there's so much noise, there's so much happening. They're trying to figure out their own daily lives. And then what we find is that we're constantly doing programs, and one of the most difficult things is when you're doing programs, getting, as they say, getting the butts in the seats. You can send out 1,000 flyers, you get X response, but nothing works better than when there's a direct relationship and then someone makes an ask. And part of the challenge is knowing enough about the residents and having enough of a relationship to fully understand which programming and which offerings work for which people so that you can do the extra push. Because I think one of the biggest challenges we're going to be facing is really how to really let folks know that what we're doing is real. That this is not something that is like a bait and switch. Because when people are living, especially folks who live in multi-generational poverty sometimes, they've heard so much. There's been so many previous promises of what's going to change their lives, what's going to be the opportunity that makes the difference. But the reality, as Kate said, it's not a linear process. There's a lot of start and stops. And it's okay to be honest about that. And to say that this isn't a magic bullet. It's a step. It's a start. And I think that those are things that we're still trying to work through, which is how do we communicate this in a way that allows people to actually believe, but we're not selling them things that as if all they have to do is do this one thing and their entire life is going to change overnight. Because that's not really how it works. And so I know many of you in the audience who work with community. I'd love to hear from you, afterwards, of outreach ideas. But from our experience, it really is the relationship that the staff have, and then trying to make sure that we can create enough systems that allow us to have the kind of data and information so we can target some of our outreach to the audience that could use the programming the most. The other area is, I would say, sustained funding. Because I think that when we look at the folks who live in our properties and the fact that this is not going to be an opportunity where people's lives change in 1 year or 2 or 3, it may even take more, that the ability to have sustained funding over several years so that people are allowed the opportunity to at least start, and if something stops them, that they can pick it up again, and then over time can begin to make that progress towards success. And for many people, that's going to take years. And we need sustained funding in order to be able to do that.
Great, thanks. And I'll ask another question for the panel here that I think follows very well, which is, to what extent do you see social connection and networking as a necessary part of people reaching their mobility and their financial goals? And if it's okay, I'd like to chime in first on that and welcome more comments. So there's a project that Fannie Mae partnered with an organization called West Denver Renaissance Collaborative, and they were an Innovation Challenge awardee as well many years ago. And one of the reasons we selected that contract proposal was because of its comprehensive program, which included the community outreach piece, the community engagement piece. And so that social networking, connecting through the social fabric in the community, I think it builds well on what you just said, was a key element. So they got a champion in one particular neighborhood. He was sort of the neighborhood go-to guy. He would speak to council. He represented that neighborhood. They talked with him first, said, look, this is the program. Here's what they did. They were building, I'd say small homes, not tiny homes, but smaller homes, accessory dwelling units in the backyards of residents in a rapidly gentrifying community. That's a big commitment to undertake, to say, yes, let's go ahead and go under construction and take on a new loan and put a home in the backyard. The idea, of course, was that those residents could then stay in the community, generating income off of that unit. It also created another unit of affordable supply in that neighborhood. So the neighborhood engagement also included a well-known local artist who does murals and big paintings in the community that reflect the culture and the community of that, or the culture and the history of that community. And those two engagements were critical to the way that they wove into the neighborhoods and could talk about their program. And of course, a big win was that the neighborhood champion rose his hand and said, I'll go first. That made it real. That made everybody else see this can happen. This is an opportunity for all of us to take. So I think that's one element of outreach, is that within the community you must represent, you must reflect that community as part of the social network that you weave into and you talk about and try to promote these programs.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think isolation is a byproduct of almost all of the barriers that we're talking about, and that is a very real issue for our families, for our children. They get really isolated, and so the outreach is critical in terms of making a connection, as Emilio described, the relationship between that staff person and the family. But part of the work has to be helping that family build a social network. For the very reason we're talking about starts and stops, and two steps forward, one step back, that our families don't have resilience until they have some of that networking in their lives, and so that they have someone that they can turn to when that step back happens. And so, convening a group of women at a site that are all interested in a particular goal, but are having trouble getting there, is just extremely valuable in helping break down that isolation, getting people to think about who in their medical community, who in their school environment, who in other environments can help be there for them over a longer period of time. And I just think that is a critical part of the healing, and that the traction, that needs to happen for families in moving towards their goals.
Great. Oh,
I was just going to say, I wholeheartedly agree with both Kate and James that the ability to build social capital for residents is critical. And the word of mouth of especially when it's key folks, like I think James was mentioning, where someone can see someone that they've known for years. And as I said, you have, at least in our properties, sometimes multi-generational folks who grew up there, their parents grew up there, and to have trusted people tell you that, hey, this is real, and I just went through this, and here's what I can share, is so important. And just the idea of social capital itself. I mean, people have been doing it, regardless of your social status, for generations. I mean, that's how new immigrants mostly get jobs. They come in, a family member says, hey, here's a garage over here, here's this place over here. If you want, I'll talk to my guy and see if you can come in. But sometimes we don't do a really good job of connecting what people already do when it comes to the work that we're doing in nonprofits. So I really appreciate, how James explained it and really shared it.
cool. Thank you. So with that, I think it's time for the open Q&A. So we'll take questions.
Thank you. Can you talk about pairing services with housing opportunities? I think I'm particularly interested in the Public Housing Authority, but all answers would be interesting, and where that service funding and partnerships come from. Thanks.
So at the Housing Authority, we typically partner for the kinds of services we're talking about today, and it's not something that we provide direct services around. And so we have a variety of partnerships. I mean, we have 60 sites across the city, and we have some centralized partnerships like we have with Empath or Compass, but we also have a lot of site-based relationships with nonprofits. And so it really varies from site to site how accessible those things are. I do think a lot of times the services are episodic, related to funding cycles, and so that just kind of connects with some of what my colleagues here have said. It's hard to get traction with a family, where they're making improvements, they're doing what they need to do, and participating, and then, we reach this funding cliff where we can't continue, or they've completed a program, but we don't kind of have the next level for them to go to yet. We don't have that in place. And so we partner with health agencies, community development corporations, hospitals. We have a variety of nonprofits in Boston that work on addiction issues and substance use disorders that we're partnered with. And so, we're just always trying to build out those partnerships and those relationships and seek funding together.
So for a number of our programming, a lot of it is funded through grants from either philanthropic institutions, but we also have made a decision, especially with our new strategic plan, to make sure that we look at the kind of benefits that we as an organization, as a housing developer, where we, over years have developer fees and have dedicated, a small portion of our development fees to go directly to some of the programming and supports that I mentioned earlier today.
Okay. Good morning, and thank you for your presentation. Mr. Dorcely, I'm sorry.
Yes.
That's right. You talked about the need for sustainable funding. So my question to you is, how do those of us who are working in communities, what is our role in making sure and pressuring the government, whether it's local, state, or federal, to provide the funding for, especially for services?
Sure. So as I mentioned earlier, when we were doing our strategic plan, obviously the wealth building was our first phase and the one that we built out through our initial phase. But one of the other pillars of the work that we want to expand is around community leadership, and organizing, because as you just said, in order for this to really work, we need community members not only to have the willingness, but also the training and the support to understand the mechanism of how government works and how to go out and articulate on their own behalf what their communities need and what they expected from their elected officials and others. And so for us, we have done a lot of work with community leaders and resident associations for years, but one of the things that we want to pivot is to be able to not necessarily be an organization where we're the ones advocating on behalf of our residents or community, but instead we're partnering and we're providing them with the resources and the training, and then we're supporting them as they continue. Because again, I did a little bit of microcredit lending years ago, and one of the things I found is that you have to invest in the people who are there, because they're going to outlast me and anyone else in my organization. And if you want to build capacity, that's where it starts.
Yeah, I just want to thank this panel. Really incredible insights. I've been taking a lot of notes, and I wanted to also acknowledge, Kate, how we didn't plan this, but just how your work here in Boston with the Housing Authority really lines up with some of what I said earlier about both and or portfolio approach, and appreciate that you're both doing the ECHO program to expand access for voucher holders across a broader range of neighborhoods, and the AMP Up, which I want to learn more about making sure communities where residents want to stay are offering them the same opportunities. So I just wanted to ask, so it's interesting you ended the conversation amongst yourselves on social cohesion and social capital as being so important for economic mobility and everything in disrupting poverty. And I know that there has, at least historically, been some tension between that and a mobility agenda. The Moving to Opportunity demonstration that HUD did years ago was aimed at creating more access for voucher holders to low poverty neighborhoods, and often failed, or when people moved back, they often said or left. They didn't stay because they felt like they weren't part of the new community. There wasn't that same social cohesion. And so I just wonder if you see a tension in your work between mobility and the value of being in a neighborhood that may offer opportunity enhancing amenities, and the value of being belonging and being part of a community and seeing yourself in the community, and if so, how you've managed it in the ECHO program or in your work in general.
Thanks, Solomon. That's a great question. We absolutely feel that tension, and it's shown itself in a variety of ways. At the end of the day, we try to just stay close to our residents and voucher holders in terms of what they want to do, what they're saying to us. Certainly, there was, a body of research, emerged that pushed housing authorities to provide opportunities for voucher holders to leave their cities and perhaps go to places that had lower crime or better schools by a variety of metrics. And some housing authorities have really taken that research and embedded it in their policies. I would say we've taken a slightly different approach, and we do have families that want to move. They want access to those different neighborhoods, and so that is why we created ECHO, and that's why we support them. But even under ECHO, you know, as you've noted, some folks come back, or they wind up moving, but they don't move out of their neighborhood. But it's still a good step for them. And then the vast majority of folks that we serve, they want to live in the neighborhood that they're in, and they want their neighborhood to get better in helping them achieve their goals. And so we're pretty careful about the way that we use the literature and the research in that regard, and we just try to sort of, we do surveys, you know, we ask residents what they want from us in that respect, and try to just sort of stay true to that. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Okay, and with that, we're at the top of the hour, so apologies for any questions we weren't able to get to. Would like to thank Kate and Emilio. Thank you so much, and thanks to all of you for your engagement in this session. Nice job.
Good job, James.
Thanks, guys.
That's a good question. That's always a thing.
Yeah.
You know, because when we did our down payment assistance, we actually decided we had this long debate about this. We said, no, we're going to get the higher down payment.
So we'll be meeting back here at 11:15 for the final session of the conference, and then there'll be lunch and time to network.